Hello, I'm James Richardson, and welcome to my channel or page or wherever you're viewing this. So I'm going to be trying something new, and it's kind of scary, and I'm kind of excited to be doing it. Oh, my power, it's getting low, so I need to finish this up fast. I'm going to start sharing with you my stories that I have written, and yes, I have a book of bulleted notes of it's to help me stay on track. So for as long as I can remember, I have always wanted to be a writer, author, published. I guess I am a writer because I like to write, and I can write. But I can never seem to finish my stories, and I'm hoping by sharing my stories with you, maybe my viewers, you can help me stay on track to actually finish it. And maybe we can, or you can help me through the process. Like, ask me questions of things I didn't think of. But yeah, I love stories, I love books, I love reading, and in my Dungeons & Dragons games that I run, I tell my players all the time that story always trumps over technical rules. So what I'm trying to say is that there will be grammar problems or errors and technical mistakes that I will no doubt be making. And but yeah, it's just part of it. I'm a storyteller, not an editor, so keep that in mind. And please, with the comments, keep them positive and, what is the word I'm looking, constructive. Yeah. And mostly don't make me regret this internet. So, without further ado, I'm going to start reading my first story with you. And later down the road, I will share with you more details of how I came up with the ideas of this story. But alright, I'm gonna get started. Book 1, Part 1. Chapter 1, Stories of Enola. Aiden Andrus was not an ordinary child, and his teachers had a tendency to remind Christopher of this. It was this that he thought of as he went to pick Aiden up from school. Aiden, they would say. He truly is gifted, quite bright for a child of his age. He has a vivid imagination, they would add. Christopher knew this, and more. Though there were other times that they warned him that Aiden's imagination seemed too vivid, that there was a chance that these fantasies that he so strongly believed could cause him to become lost within his very mind. He truly paid no mind to these warnings. Christopher strongly thought that Aiden's imagination was completely healthy, and they did not know what he knew. They did not know the truth. As he pulled into the school, he saw that there was an ambulance pulled onto the curb. Christopher parked and entered the elementary school through double doors, past a security guard at his post. The school was quiet, as classes were still in session, though it wouldn't be long before school would be cancelled. He was at the house watching the news forecast. The meteorologist was predicting that a storm was building in the Gulf of Mexico. There was no doubt about it. There was a strong wind blowing from the coast. The palm trees danced, and dark clouds could be seen gathering in the distance. It was while he watched the news that he received a call. Aiden had injured himself. Christopher entered the main office. He found the boy sitting with his head hanging and his arms tightly gripping the seat of the bench. Sitting at the opposite from Aiden was a paramedic, and the school nurse who watched him with a worried expression on her face. Christopher went to Aiden and nudged his shoulder. "Aiden, are you all right?" asked Christopher. When Aidan looked up at the sound of his father's voice, Christopher saw that his son's eyes were red from crying, and he had busted a lip. Aidan answered with a small, ashamed voice, "I'm okay, Dad." Christopher sat down next to his son. "What exactly happened, Aidan?" "I tripped." Christopher knew that this was not the truth. He knew Aidan was holding something back. "He fell down the bleachers," explained the nurse. "There was quite a lot of blood at the time of the incident. I expected him to have had broken a bone or two. It was a long, rough fall down those bleachers. When I looked over your son for injuries, all he seemed to have suffered was a busted lip and a few scrapes," the paramedic said, sounding amazed. He scratched the top of his head. "Which doesn't make a lick of sense. There shouldn't have been that much blood from just a busted lip and scrapes." The paramedic shrugged. "Aidan, you're either very lucky or related to the Wolverine. That fall could have been fatal. You sure you're in the right school? I'm sure there are schools for extraordinary children just like you." Aidan laughed through his tears at the joke. "But in all seriousness, Mr. Andrus," the paramedic pulled Christopher to the side, "I recommend getting Aidan further examined. He could be injured. There is only so much I can do with the equipment I have." Christopher watched Aidan from outside the office. The nurse was squatting in front of Aidan. She says something. Through the glass, Christopher isn't sure what is said, though Aidan smiles, wipes away tears, and laughs. The nurse laughed with Aidan. He can actually hear their laughter. Christopher sighs and agrees with the paramedic. "You're right, absolutely. I should get my son further examined." He tells the man this only because it is what Christopher thought he wanted to hear. That and they did not know the truth of his son. As Aidan and Christopher made their way toward the parking lot, there was a chaos of activity as emergency sirens began to blare. Just before parents of the students began to trickle in to beat the growing storm in the Gulf. The storm is predicted to become a tropical storm. It's expected to cause massive damage from the wind and flooding, explained parent entering the administrative office. Outside, hurriedly heading toward the car, Christopher saw that the clouds that had been gathering had begun to roll forward, and the wind began to roar. There was a clash of thunder. "Come, Aidan," said Christopher. "Hopefully we can beat this storm home." It was strange how fast this storm had appeared. Aidan was restless in his bed that night. Lightning flashed outside his window. A gale of wind swept over the Gulf of Mexico. The walls creaked. Rain clattered upon the roof, and thunder shook the house. It was only a thunderstorm, was what Christopher had told him. Still, the storm scared him, and as long as the storm raged, Aidan would never sleep. The only way he would be able to sleep was by getting Christopher to tell his stories, and that is exactly what he was going to do. Christopher was downstairs. Aidan could hear the news reporter on the television talking. Though the woman's voice was low, he could not make out all that she said. Thunder shook the house once more, and the lights flickered. "Chris!" called Aidan, jumping from his bed. He ran from his room and was about to race down the stairs. Standing at the foot of the stairs was Christopher. He shook his head, chuckling, and said, "It's all right. It was only a power surge." Aidan looked up at the lights once more as it flickered. "Will you tell me a story? The one about Enola?" Christopher ruffled Aidan's brunette hair and said, "Of course. But first, let's get you tucked into bed." Aidan was excited, and the storm was forgotten.
He darted back to his room and jumped back into the bed, throwing his covers over himself. A chair was pulled near the bed from its permanent spot. Storytelling was almost a nightly routine. Christopher looked over his son and nodded. "I see now even your lip has managed to heal." He considered his son as Aidan began to withdraw into himself. "Did you truly think that I would have forgotten about today, Aidan?" asked Christopher. "You know you can tell me anything." Aidan sighed. "I was made fun of again today." "About what?" He looked away from his father. "I was telling everyone about Enola." It was exactly what Christopher was afraid the whole ordeal was about. "I was called a freak and a weirdo because of the things I told them." Christopher leaned forward, resting his elbows upon his knees. Placing his head into his hands, he said, "You explained to them that Enola is fictional, just like Narnia?" Christopher's heart ached. He longed so badly for his home. The look that Aidan gave Christopher was answer enough. It was the same stubborn look of a child who refused to stop believing Santa Claus and the Easter Bunny. Christopher refused to be the person to destroy that part of his son. "Dad," asked Aidan, "you're not going to stop telling me stories of Enola, are you?" "Of course not," sighed Christopher. He watched as joy returned to his son's face. Aidan laid in bed, waiting in anticipation for Christopher to begin his story. "Enola," began Christopher. "Enola is a world of barbarians, kings, queens, knights, and magic, those of good and evil. The world was made up of 4 kingdoms. There was Idara, sun-scorched sands and rolling dunes; Kirmor, kingdom of green forest and fertile valleys; Thragon Tundra, a kingdom of ice and frost. And in Enola, the world's greatest kingdom was that of Telegem. It stretched from the high cliffs of Dirge and across the plains that went on for many hundreds miles to the coast." There was a pause. It was as if Christopher reflected of some past event, or some distant land, or even Enola. "Dad?" asked Aidan worriedly. "Ah, yes. Where was I?" "The floating islands," said Aidan. "That is next." "How can I forget the floating islands?" Christopher leaned back in his chair and closed his eyes, and continued. "The plains were always covered in a light mist, and in the sky was floating pieces of earth, large pieces, floating islands, and on one of these islands, the largest, was the grand city of Telegem. Its great walls could not be collapsed by giants or titans. The banners of Boss Hira was atop the walls through rain, sleet, and snow. A great lion jaws open and claws raised. The grand city was an architectural wonder, and it was also the home of an order of knights known as the Veil Knights. Christopher stood to tell this part of the tale, as if excited. Though Aidan's eyes were already beginning to become heavy, he had heard this tale many times before. "The Knights of the Veil are the guardians of Enola. Their sword arms reached all 4 kingdoms, and their shields defended the realm from the void." This part of the story excited Aidan as well, for he had a second burst of energy. Christopher leaned toward Aidan. "The Veil, or the Void, is home to demons, devils, spirits, and other manner of beasts. Sometimes these monsters escaped the void, and when they did, they would do awful things. The thunder rumbled, and the lights flickered once more. Aiden had pulled his cover all the way to the edge of his eyes. The sight of this caused Christopher to chuckle. The Knights of the Veil's duty was to find those monsters and send them back from where they came. They would do anything to send them back. Though they were not outside the law, there were some that would go that far, though. They did so for Enola, because it was wonderful. Their home, a home to their families and loved ones. Aiden's eyes were heavy, and the thunder and rain had begun to slow. When Aiden finally fell to sleep, Christopher watched him. The storm had picked back up, but he would sleep through it. Soon Christopher would be taken by sleep. He would dream of Enola. As the storm raged over the Gulf of Mexico, so too did the demons within the void.